Great. So we're going to move into a really quick scribing session. We're a little over time, so I'm trying to get to our breakout room so that we have time for our upcoming activity. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So there's some differences between a scribe and a note taker. We talk about a scribe as someone that has the ability to listen and record participants' comments during the session or studio, so participants can see that their voices are documented. These notes also are really helpful for the facilitator in guiding the conversation. They serve as a reference point to say, okay, here's what we've said. What are we missing? Look at all the things we've talked about today. What's your top recommendation? So we have developed a scribe training for our new employees, and our new team members go through a year-long training/internship in all things studio. So we start with scribing because that is an essential function for someone to be able to listen and to really pull out the meat of the conversation. So when we look for a scribe, in person, these were done on big, large Post-it papers. And so you would actually see someone writing responses to questions up on the wall, right? And it was really helpful for people to look at and reference and to say, oh, I agree with something that someone said over on question 1. So there's been some changes to virtual. We'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. The person that's scribing should have clear, readable penmanship and be able to spell accurately because these are taken live. Be comfortable being present and writing in front of others. That can be intimidating for some people. Have excellent note-taking skills, be able to summarize information. So you don't want to scribe word for word, right? You're not a transcriptionist that's documenting everything, because people are going to share stories. They're going to give you, set up their opinions and set up their experiences. And so we're really looking for the response that's going to provide a summary to the researcher at the end of this. Being able to edit and proofread as these notes are later turned into a report back for researchers. Have a personal and welcoming demeanor because they are part of the studio team. And then be a team player. We've really found that not everyone can scribe. Even those with 2 years of higher education may not enjoy scribing or may not be good at scribing. It really is a unique skill because it's listening. It's really involving listening and being able to summarize in the moment. So you have to be a fast thinker, being able to write really quickly, listen and write at the same time, and to do so with as little as interjection into the conversation as possible. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So when we look for scribes, they need to be available, obviously, during studio times, reviewing the transcript of session notes for clarification and organization. And then they do need to be CITI and HIPAA certified because we are dealing with patients, right, and sensitive information. So in person, the differences between in-person and virtual scribing. In person, this person needed to stand and write for 2 hours. That can be physically tasking in and of itself. Sometimes you're up high, sometimes you're bending down low. So it really does require some physical agility in person. Summarizing notes verbally. So sometimes the facilitator may call on the scribe and say, can you let us know what we said for question 1? And there's that relationship between the scribe and the facilitator helping each other out throughout the session. And then the ability to ask clarifying questions from the facilitator. If they're not sure if they've heard something or if they've heard too many things at once and they say, oh, I think I missed something that Jennifer said. Can you restate that for me? That was an option in person. So when we switched to virtual, we started out by trying to maintain as much similarity as possible. So we would have the screen share with a Word document, and the scribe would sit and live note take just as they would in person. However, we found that was a bit distracting for both the scribe, the facilitator, and the participants because we weren't able to see everyone at the same time. The scribe was hesitant to type versus writing because I think we think more when we're typing about spelling and things like that. So now we have a shared Google document or a Word document between the facilitator and the scribe. So the facilitator can see what's being summarized and reference back to it in live time while the scribe is documenting voices. And we also use the chat feature in Zoom to ask clarifying questions between the scribe and the facilitator if something's been missed, as well as allowing participants to contribute things anonymously directly with the scribe that can be put into the report. In person, we used to have a document, a note sheet that people could write things down that they didn't want to share verbally. So now we utilize the chat for that and put those directly into the scribe document. I see a question, Ed.
Yes, and Bree, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to say this because I know how you scribe. And the one very important thing that you also do is make sure with the participants that what you write on the paper is actually what they said. You've done that many a time just to make sure that you've recorded things accurately. And I think that's very important. Sorry to include that.
No, thank you for including that, Ed. And Ed is from our Utah area and has participated in many studios himself. So thank you, Ed, for sharing that. If you'll go to the next slide. So we have actually like a scribe toolkit, and we continue to add to that as we learn and as people are being trained, lessons that they learn and tips for how to word certain things, how to be the most successful scribe you can be. So here are just a few. In person was writing in an appropriate size, don't use cursive, some basic things. One thing that's really important is not using acronyms. Many times participants will reference an acronym, and if we write that down, we may not know exactly what that was later. Or if we're summarizing using an acronym, people that are viewing may not understand what that is. So always spelling out or asking for definitions of acronyms is really important. Again, we want to eliminate identifying data such as the story, right? So, oh, well, one time I went to the grocery store, Smith's, with my uncle, and while we were there, we had this conversation about being Hispanic or Latino and feeling isolated from participating in research. Well, we can pull out all of that extra story and just get to that point about feeling isolated from research. Listen for answers, not the stories. So really keeping in mind the questions. And so it's important that the scribe has communicated with the facilitator ahead of time and knows what's going to be asked. Using bulleted lists. So making sure that we are tracking everything under one topic if needed. Using tally marks if something is repeated. So we do this virtually by putting an asterisk next to a comment if someone says, oh, I agree with what they said, or I also think this, or if they say the same exact thing and it's already been said. So then we're not duplicating information. It makes it a bit easier. When you're in person, you stand ready to write with your marker on the paper, facing the board, just ready to listen. In person or virtually, excuse me, it's the same thing. You're sitting there and with your camera off and you're just listening and your fingers are ready to type because so many things are going to be shared so quickly as we'll see in the demonstration studio coming up. Wearing comfortable yet professional looking shoes and clothing, that was in person, and then asking the facilitator or the participant for clarification if needed. It's okay to pause the conversation and say, I want to make sure that I've heard that I'm documenting what you're saying correctly. So what I hear is X, Y, or Z. And I think that's very important, especially in a virtual space. So whether that's the facilitator that takes time to clarify because they see that the scribe maybe hasn't documented someone's comment, so maybe they're struggling to word it or they didn't hear it correctly. So having that working relationship kind of on the sidebar between the facilitator and scribe is really important. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So before we practice, I just want to give, I know we're short on time, but does anyone have a pertinent or question they're just dying to ask about scribing? Because we're going to have an activity where we're going to get the opportunity to try this for ourselves.
Yeah, I do have a question. It's Carla Williams. How do you, in selecting a scribe, what skill sets would indicate that they'll be good at it? Because you won't know until you get into all the details. So what do you look for when you're in the hiring process?
Right. And I'd be happy to share offline with you some of our job descriptions that we posted. So before they actually have an interview, 15 minutes before, they go through the exact practice that we're going to do now. And then we evaluate that as part of their interview process. And then once hired, we provide them with all of this training beforehand so that, and then they co-scribe so that they're not responsible for documenting everything. They have a skilled scribe up there to help them and to take turns or to fill in blanks. So it's an 8 to 10 hour process of training from start to finish, and it's chunked out over time. So one thing that we've found really helpful is educators make great scribes, because as teachers, you're used to listening to many things going on and documenting important things on a board. So that's one skill that's really helpful. Also, students that are used to taking excellent lecture notes make really good candidates. So we've actually posted jobs for scribes for on student employment boards. Okay.
Hey,
Yes.
real quick, I just want to throw this out there to the conference chairs. Do we feel like we have enough time to do the listening session and the breakouts and then come back for prep for the studio? Because the only unbendable time we have is the 12:30 start time for our community experts and the studio.
Could we do it in the large room after we hear the 5-minute audio and just not go to breakout?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, let's do that. We're interested to hear the audio.
Yeah. So this exercise is listening to one question that was asked during a sample studio that we conducted. And it was just about engaging different communities and different backgrounds in research studies. So it's very general. And you're going to hear a facilitator ask one question, and this will be the question that you will hear responses to. So the activity is to listen and to take your own notes as if you were a scribe. So remember that someone would see what you're writing down. Obviously, we want to capture as much as possible, but we also want to keep it concise and readable. And yes, Carla, student note taking is a dying skill. So this is our turn to exercise those old skills that we probably had before technology and before PowerPoints. So I invite you to not look at the camera because there's nothing to see. You're just going to hear audio, because as a scribe, you often don't see who's talking, you just hear. So listen, take as many notes as possible, and then we'll do a quick discussion. So I'm going to press play on this short clip of one question.
How do I get community members to participate and remain in the study?
When you are developing research, involve the communities in the beginning. Don't use them as an afterthought or as a project. Think of them as people that are valuable to your results, and start from the beginning with them, not bring them in midway saying, oh, by the way, we forgot you were here, we forgot we needed you. Also, be honest with them. Tell them exactly what you're doing. If you're going to take blood, why you're taking blood, because they might not know. That's very invasive. What you're doing and why. There has to be a purpose to every step that you're taking.
Thank you, Kathy. Sadie?
Just looking at this, it's confusing to me why they need to have 11 visits.
Okay.
And $25 for me to come up to the institution seems like a huge, like I'm not getting reimbursed for my time.
Got it.
If I have, children at home and I need to prepare dinner and I have kids at school, and you're asking me to come up 11 times, I think 11 times is excessive. And I think $25 is an insult. Okay, because if I have to get childcare for my kids to come up, or I need to get taxi, or I need to get someone to drive me because I got transportation issues, I think that's a little bit insane to have them come up 11 times. Is there a way that if they need to do 11 blood draws or 11 visits, is there a way we can do that? They can come out to me, or can you just give me a lab kit and I can just go to the lab that's down the street from me? Why do I need to drive all the way up? You know, it's 20, 30 minutes away from my home, okay, to have you draw blood.
What I could add is you need to make sure that the community is interested in whatever topic you are talking about. So having somebody from the community who knows the background of the audience is really helpful, because you don't want to bring in a language that the community do not understand. Make sure you don't use this much medical terminology. I mean, that's why having somebody from the community who knows how to interpret those medical terminology is really necessary. The other thing is, this has to be a win-win situation, okay? What kind of incentives is the community going to get? It can be, after the research, make sure you bring the result back to the community to see how your research is going to be helpful to them, instead of just getting the information and then they will never see you again.
You got under.
So we'll stop there. And that was 3 minutes. And a lot of information was shared by 3 different participants in those 3 minutes. So in our breakout rooms, we're going to share and compare our notes and determine what we heard as the takeaways for the research team, and also just tips on scribing. But I will just open this for 1 or 2 minutes. If anyone would like to share either how they felt during that and what they took away from that experience of listening and trying to document, and or what they heard from the participants and what they pulled out.
This is Carla again. It was harder than I remembered as a student. Maybe I'm older now, but it was harder than I remember it being to try to get everything that I was hearing.
Yes, and that's a huge challenge. So that's why this training is so important, because putting someone up in front of people and asking them to document, things are going to get missed, right? And if we're not recording, it's really important to be able to get all of these important things we hear. Anyone else have a comment they'd like to share?
Yeah, this is Ed. I had a hard time refraining from reinterpreting what they were saying in my own sort of like language idioms.
Yes. So everyone has a different way of speaking, a different syntax, a different words to mean the same thing. So it's really important to be able to listen to and to find something that makes sense for everyone, right? So I see Pam in the chat saying, be honest, incentivize, and keep the participants interested. We also heard transportation is a barrier. Compensation needs to be appropriate. Meeting people where they're at. So thank you, Ed, for bringing up that listening and translating into your own words can be a habit that we need to watch for. Anyone else have any comments? I see lots of great things happening in the chat, and I will try and respond to some of those in the chat. For sake of time, I think
this is Marquetta. Yeah, in any group, I always say I will not be the note taker, just because I do like to listen. I do like to listen intently, and I like to talk. So it is hard my hardest part was actually writing down the actual question. And so when it got to the answers, I could kind of bullet the answers, but I was thinking, okay, even though I'm writing these points down, if someone else was reading it, would they know exactly what I was referring to? And so I tried to make little notes in parentheses and things like that. But yeah, I would definitely need to be trained on how to scribe and make sure that my audience was that was receiving this information could read it and disseminate exactly what was happening in the studio without watching it themselves. And so, yeah, that was very interesting. I like doing that, but I will not be the secretary in a group. I'm sorry.
I appreciate you giving it a try, and I'm glad that you mentioned the question, because I didn't bring that up earlier. When we were in person, we had the question already written up
Right.
on the wall, right, on these papers. So someone, it wasn't an issue. And sometimes people will answer question 4 when we're still on question 1. So as a scribe, you have to know all the questions. So you could say, oh, that doesn't belong here, that belongs over there. So lots of great ideas. Hopefully that was a quick overview. Here's our recommended training.
Hey, Bree, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we need to go.
Yeah, because we need to hear that explanation for the studio. That's kind of a highlight of our day. So we don't want to cut it too much into Tiffany's time. So if there's a way to maybe some of this can be kind of carried over, shared in the breakouts, that'll be great.
Absolutely. Yep. So I'm happy to discuss offline with anyone as well. And so I look forward to listening to Tiffany share this next summary of our studio.